evening, depending on part of the world that you are joining us. Once again, thank you very much for joining and attending this session, which is actually going to be focusing around business leadership with a lot of focus around disability inclusion. I know for the African Business and Human Rights Forum, there's a lot of conversation around how do we promote disability rights and how do we ensure that without trying to be more tokenistic, we can really ensure that businesses are more inclusive. Oftentimes, whenever we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, the conversation is always around gender, ethnicity, or race. But again, today we'll be taking examples from other organizations to share experience with us. I have 4 panelists who will be sharing their experience. And in the spirit of time, I'll first introduce myself, being the moderator. My name is Rasak Adekoya, and I work with Sightsavers as the technical advisor for economic empowerment. To my right, I have Paul Agbai from Unilever, who is one of the HR business partner, but he also has some responsibility around diversity and inclusion within Unilever. To my left, I have another gentleman, Julius, who is the advocacy officer for inABLE, based here in Kenya. It would be good to be sure if Srilakshmi from the Ethiopian Business and Disability Network is joining us online directly from Ethiopia. That's Addis specifically. Srilakshmi, are you online? If you are, can you just say hello to us?
Yeah, hello everyone. Just give me a moment. Yeah, hi. Yes, I'm Srilakshmi Subramanyam. I'm the program lead for the Ethiopian Business and Disability Network. I am based in Addis, but currently in Sri Lanka, and happy to be joining here today.
Thank you very much for joining. I don't know if Paul Kisumu from Safaricom is in the room. If yes, please come over. If not, probably we will start for now, and then we will take it up from there. Once again, thank you all for joining. So I will be starting with a general question to all the panelists, particularly around what exactly are the misconceptions around people with disability whenever we talk around employment, and what has been your own experience depending on where you work. So maybe I should start with Srilakshmi, who is the woman with us, who is joining online. What's your experience around those misconceptions? And I'll come to you, Julius, soon, and then Paul from Unilever.
Yeah, Rasak, thank you. So I think when it comes to the misconceptions, most companies are somewhat hesitant to hire persons with disabilities due to fears of discrimination or the belief that they are not as productive due to their disability, and that they're also sometimes considered as an extra cost to the company, which is the biggest misconception according to me. Companies are yet to understand the abilities and benefits that diversity brings, especially through disability inclusion. Factors such as increased retention or fostering the spirit of oneness in the workplace when you hire someone with a disability. And the very knowledge of this is something that's missing. And at EBDN, we try and educate companies through various training and awareness building sessions, which many a times is more than sufficient to remove these misconceptions.
Thank you very much. And I think that's quite a chunk of information there, particularly about company perception. I'm sure maybe we'll get another perspective from Paul from Unilever. But let me first get the perspective of Julius. You are also a person with disability as well, apart from the fact that you're doing advocacy with inABLE. What's it like for you?
Yes, thank you very much, Rasak. When it comes to disability, I think the biggest misconception is that all persons with disabilities are the same. And we are put in this bubble where people think that, and we are put on a measure that once a person with a disability has done something, it is mainstream to all persons with disabilities. Over and above persons with disabilities being looked down upon as if we are not capable, I think the next misconception that is there that is not spoken is that persons with disabilities cannot take on leadership roles. And you find even in these companies, organizations, you find persons with disabilities who are stuck in one position. And if even when they are employed, they are not engaged as much as they should. And I've had to advocate for a few peers who feel that they are underused in their organizations, in their roles that they are given, their job descriptions. So you end up even asking for more work because they feel like you're fragile or you cannot measure up to what your colleagues are doing. And again, even you find in some setup, persons with disabilities are neglected when it comes to even like extracurricular activities. Like people are going for, say, sporting activities, and persons with disabilities are not even informed of these activities. So I'd say when we look at stigma and discrimination, it's not on the face of it. We have to dig deeper. Even when we are given an opportunity, then how much of value are we getting as persons with disabilities? And I think even for us, persons with disabilities, we need to stand for ourselves and tell the employer or people who are above us that, you know, I can do this and that. And the best thing that companies and organizations can do is to understand the individual as a distinct individual, not as a cluster of persons with disabilities are like this or that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Institutions probably will be probably have that mindset where once one person with disability take a loan and default, then automatically all persons with disability will definitely not be willing to pay back. But again, you talk about underutilization. Let me turn to Paul.
Yep.
I mean, from Unilever, what's your experience engaging with your colleagues, particularly around the misconception, and what has been the way around it? How have you been able to navigate that?
Very well. And hi, everyone. So for me, I think one of the biggest misconceptions, and I'm going to speak about two things. The first is where a lot of us get to think that disability is all physical or is visible. Over time and with education and research, we've come to understand that there are different forms of disability which cannot be seen by the eye, so which are not physically demonstrated. And we get to manage or treat this within the organization through knowledge, right? Constant and consistent flow of information from all parts of the business, getting people to understand what disability is all about, the broader or the wider spectrum of disability, getting people to understand the role each person has to play. We rolled out a program, a learning program across Africa, which we hosted on our online platform, guiding line managers, hiring managers, talent resources, even as an HR community, how do we deal with persons with disability? And then what are the different types of disability and how do we deal with them? The other bit is what Julius spoke about briefly is the let me call it the inability to balance equity with equality. I think when we talk about equity, as employers or people in business, we need to understand that what's the objective? The objective is to get everybody to operate at optimal capacity. What equity is in understanding and addressing the unique needs, the unique mechanisms that need to be put in place for each person to be able to operate, to deliver at optimum capacity. And for me, I think that's where we have come. And I'm sure in the course of the conversation, we'll get to talk about some of them to say, what are some of the interventions we have put in place to make sure that we almost give a level playing field for all persons with disability within the organization. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Persons with disabilities, we often call the unseen disability. But If I could still stay with you, Paul, around what's the experience around training and recruitment of persons with disability, and what are some best practices or successful experiences you've had in the past within Unilever? And for people online, if you have questions, please feel free to drop in the chat box.
Great.
Yes, back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Rasak. So in dealing with persons with disability, I think it's a broad spectrum. We would first start from attraction. How do we attract the talent? And then retention. When they come in, how do we retain them? And what systems do we have in place to make sure they are very comfortable? Now, let me start with attraction. Attraction is in how do we communicate our value proposition as an employee, as an employer, when it comes to persons with disability. It's very, very important that we state boldly, and for us as an organization, we have been very, very audacious and bold around our commitment and our drive to attract persons with disability on our job portals, online or written. We almost always make it very clear to say that we are equally attracting, or this job application is open to all classes of people. The other thing that we have done is we have reviewed our application process, right? For certain classes of recruitment where aptitude tests are required, where certain tests are required, we work with Sightsavers to say, how are we able to review the application process to make it more disability friendly? Again, remember, I spoke about equity. While the expectation is that we all get to operate and play at a level playing field, we need different things and different levels of support. And one of it is, how have we reviewed the process of bringing them in, of interviewing? What tools have we put in place to make sure that we attract them? Now, when we are able to bring them in around retention, that's where we engage in deploying what we call accessible or reasonable accommodation within the organization. So sometime in 2019, we did what we call a site disability audit, where we looked at our sites to say, what would make a person with disability operate optimally within our site or within our location? And we worked with Sightsavers to say, do a professional or a technical audit of our site, give us a technical report on what do we need to do, what do we need to improve to make sure that our site is disability friendly. And gradually, we were able to put in place some of these mechanisms, some of these infrastructure, or some of these accessibility tools around, just to make our site or our offices very, very accessible. And this we have done across Ghana and Nigeria, and we are looking to extend to other sites of the company.
Okay, thank you very much. Organizations more inclusive and how you are kind of promoting that. But let me come back to you, Julius. In view of the work you're doing at enABLE, you talked about, I remember when we were talking initially, how you're also doing what I would call a kind of forward integration, training of people already in secondary school to have some digital skills. What do you think is informing that? And how best do you think we can do more, particularly for those at the tertiary level?
Yes, thank you, Rasak. So when we looked at the gaps that are there for persons with disabilities to be equipped for the job market, accessibility is a big issue, digital accessibility. And for you to position a person with a disability, the best thing you can do is give them digital skills. The traditional and the most known way of communication for people who are blind is Braille, but Braille cannot translate into the wider society without having challenges. I have gone through challenges like in my tertiary level, where using Braille was cumbersome because the university has to transcribe, it has to go through like 5 different hands before your assignment is marked or you're graded. So for digital accessibility, And in the era that we are in right now, the digital world, you need persons with disabilities to be able to access information without having to depend on other people. And our idea is to empower visually impaired and persons with disabilities with digital skills, most importantly, the computer assistive technology, so that they can easily and seamlessly integrate into the society, even get into employment without having to struggle so much. Because nowadays, as you can all agree with me, we are using the digital and the online platforms a lot, even for our dispensation of work and even our job descriptions. You cannot easily get a job without having to interact with a computer in one way or another. So the best gift you can give someone who's visually impaired or someone with a disability is the power of accessing the digital world, but also making the digital platforms accessible and making sure that persons with disabilities don't go through the struggles of having to maybe infringe your privacy or having to depend on someone else to be a burden, so that you access information that you can access by yourself.
Thank you very much for disability technology make things possible. Let me come to you, Srilakshmi, online, to talk around what do you think are the key benefits for companies when it comes to the promotion and employment of persons with disability? What are the effective measures there? And let's speak more on the benefit now. We've talked about how, but what is the need for businesses, particularly for some people who are in the audience? And I'll come to you very soon, Paul, on that.
Thanks, Rasak. I think there's enough research, enough evidence about hiring persons with disabilities and the benefits that it brings to your company. And I think I already mentioned earlier the benefits that diversity, especially in terms of persons with disabilities, the benefits that it brings is immense. It truly can create an environment of oneness in the workplace, and it always helps to create a conducive work environment. But apart from that, we also see that when persons with disabilities are working in those specific teams, the entire team actually starts doing much better in terms of their performance. The team is highly motivated. And I think it fosters a sense of innovation, which is really interesting to observe. That's something I've observed firsthand in all the companies that I've worked with. We also see higher retention among employees with disabilities. And as we all know in the industry, employee turnover is very, very common. And especially in times like these, where it can actually create a very big problem, you see this amazing effect, when you offer someone with a disability a job, especially in countries like Ethiopia. It almost opens up a door for this person in terms of not just getting that job, but being able to be financially independent and more secure, and they're taking care of their families. So they're not actually job hopping like most other persons would do in the market. And this is not just seen in Ethiopia or Africa, but it's also been observed world over. Retention levels among employees with disabilities are really high. I think, yeah, these are some of the benefits, but keeping time in mind, I think I would pass that on to maybe Paul to, speak more about it.
Interesting. It's in report that talks about the disability inclusion advantage. Let me come to you, Paul. I mean, you are working in the business. You've hired people with disability. Tell us, what's the benefit? Are you really benefiting?
Definitely, Rasak. And like Srilakshmi said, I always think about it as just imagine in a community where you have people of different backgrounds, different orientations, and different ways of thinking. What that only means is there is more innovation. What that only means is the varied ideas, varied thought processes to how we get to do things. And that's the innovation that almost every business is seeking to grow. It also helps you to veer into uncharted paths or waters because of the ideas that they bring, the ideas that they come on board with. And Srilakshmi had said it around the talent retention, right? This group of people are, I mean, by research, are found to be very loyal. So as an organization, part of the things that most companies get to deal with is knowledge loss. So you have groups of people who come in with so much ideas, so much innovation, thinking outside the box, and of course, are guaranteeing you that level of retention. I think it's a great benefit to every business entity across the world. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much on that. But maybe I should go back to Srilakshmi, particularly around the National Business and Disability Network. Yeah. For people in the room, the ILO constitutes what we call the Global Business and Disability Network, and then encourages companies at national level to have what we call Business and Disability Network, which is more of a peer-to-peer where companies come together, learn from one another, and support one another. I mean, you are leading that in Ethiopia. And where do you see this as a benefit? How do you see this as a way of promoting disability inclusion in companies? I think it would be good to get your practical experience.
Sure. Yeah, in Ethiopia, I think, as you mentioned, it is a peer-to-peer network. Creating a network itself for the business community, specifically for disability inclusion, is something that's very innovative. I really appreciate the ILO for doing this across the world, not just in Africa or in Ethiopia. There are many national business disability networks across the world, including India, where I'm from. And I think these networks play a very important role in bridging that gap between the community, the job seeker community of persons with disabilities, and the companies and the private sector, which often is missing when you look at the business community and when you look at, say, non-profits or NGOs that are working with persons with disabilities. There's usually a missing link there. And I think that's the thing National Business Disability Networks do, to bring both these communities together so that both can benefit from each other, specifically when it comes to employment. Specifically to EBDN, I think it's played a crucial role in increasing the awareness of employers around the abilities of hiring persons with disabilities. And especially in the last 1 year, we've partnered with the ILO Ethiopia to focus on doing this specifically in industrial parks, which are big in manufacturing. So the availability of jobs in these zones are always higher. And when we create inclusion here, it directly links to increased employment, easier employment. So apart from creating awareness on disability, we've helped companies assess their premises, their office premises, conducted accessibility audits, and also assessed their HR policies and provided recommendations to become more inclusive. I think most importantly, we help companies meet their hiring needs by sharing our database of job seekers that's segregated region-wise. So it really helps companies, because that's the other missing link when it comes to especially the recruitment of persons with disabilities. At least in Ethiopia, most companies don't know how to hire and where to hire persons with disabilities from, because most persons with disabilities are not registering on traditional job boards for various reasons. But that is a reality of the situation. So we've had to create our own database and Luckily, that's been helping companies a lot. And generally, I think the partnership approach that most NBDNs have, the National Business Disability Network have with companies, and that we have, especially at EBDN with the companies in Ethiopia, it really allows for quick and timely support whenever a company requires it. So yeah, thanks.
Very much on that. I know Unilever, you were part of the founding members for the network in Nigeria, and recently, I know you started that process of the Ghana Business and Disability Network. Is there any benefit for you, or is it a way of positioning your business? And I know Unilever is also a member of the ILO Global Business and Disability Network.
Yeah, thanks, Rasak. So for us, I always cherish the opportunity to learn from other organizations what they are doing, because a lot of times we would think we may have done so much until we get to hear what other companies are doing around advancing the cause of inclusion of persons with disability within the organization. And it's always very humbling. And that's one of the reasons I really, really appreciate the Business Disability Network. The other part of it is the advocacy leg, which is extremely, extremely important, especially in the sub-region within which we operate, being West Africa, not too sure about the Eastern Bloc, to say we need to drive, or we need to have legislation or laws that promote the welfare of persons with disability within the workplace and in the society. And the NBDN, the Business Disability Network, for me, has been one of the very, very effective platforms where we get to discuss to say, what do we need to put in place? What are the proposals we need to put before the relevant authorities as part of advancing the welfare, or advancing the cause of persons with disability within our society, in addition to what Srilakshmi has said, Rasak.
Thank you very much. I'm sure people who are also businesses in the room who are from Kenya will be asking, do we have same in Kenya? And I think the answer is yes. We can always catch up about that later. Let me turn to my friend, Julius. How do you think non-entities like organizations of persons with disabilities, how do you think they can best support companies to be more disability inclusive? Because there are much more small, medium companies, not the multinationals, for example, who are also in the community. How do you think we can support them?
Thank you, Rasak. There are many opportunities for organizations of persons with disabilities and companies, the private sector, to collaborate, because if you look at it from the point of the know-how, the organizations of persons with disabilities understand the landscape better, and they're in the best position to actually guide companies and institutions to be more inclusive. And for example, at inABLE, we launched the first ever ICT accessibility standard, KS 2952, that outlines ways in which government and also companies, the private sector, organizations, institutions can be more inclusive when it comes to digital assets. And it breaks down, different aspects of accessibility, starting with hardware, going to software, and even documentation, and even relay services for persons with disabilities. So there are many opportunities, starting with disability etiquette, where companies can align with organizations for persons with disabilities to best understand the disability world, and also be more accommodative when it comes to persons with disabilities, and put in place measures that will ensure that their service delivery, and also if they're in the recruitment and retention, employing persons with disabilities, they follow the right guidelines without having to strain themselves, but also being guided the right way. So I think those are many ways where organizations, companies can come together to make sure that we have an inclusive society.
Thank you very much for that. I am sure people have questions, comments. So maybe we'll take the first 3 or 4 in the room. My friend from UNICEF, Soledad, is going to kind of point it to you, and then you can proceed. The first 3 or 4. Yeah, let's go ahead.
Please, the lady with the blue shirt, you can start, and then over to the gentleman. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the presentation and for the interesting discussion. My name is Asibazo Harriet. I am from Uganda, and I coordinate the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights in Uganda. My observation is just like a speaker had earlier on highlighted. Sometimes when we talk about disability, it's easier to talk about the physical disability. Even when it comes to recruitment, most companies prefer to mainstream those with physical disability than any other type of disability. But I think largely it's because of, according to what they told us, partly it's because of the costs associated in employing the persons with other categories. For instance, they do say that when you employ someone maybe who will need a speech translation, that will ordinarily mean you employ like 2 people, which of course is a little fake, but I think somehow it makes economic sense to them. So what can we do as a continent to ensure that actually the employment of persons with disability generically is actually embraced by the companies? But also I would like to know beyond employment, there are also other aspects within business context that persons with disabilities could participate in. For instance, persons with disabilities could be the owners of the businesses themselves. So what are some of the initiatives that are actually there to promote their involvement? But also just beyond being employed, there could be consumers. But you see that the assistive devices which come in, literally for the case of Uganda, I may say, they are a little costly for them. So what other steps could we undertake to engage other companies that supply these devices to make sure that they're actually affordable and also user-friendly to the persons with disabilities? I beg to submit.
Thank you very much. Maybe we can give the floor to the gentleman, and then we go for the answers.
Thank you. My name is Neville from the Center for Human Rights and also the Universal Rights Group. I wanted to ask, when it comes to disability employment, in most cases, we tend to focus on the employer, but what do CSOs, what can CSOs do? Because understanding that most, when it comes to disability employment, one of the key issue is stereotypes, and stereotypes usually happen apart from the employer, also the other employees that are in the workspace. But apart from that now, the other employees in the workspace. And when you have disability conversations, it's mostly in places like this, but not on the ground exactly where the people are in the communities. I wanted to ask, what can CSOs do so that we can eradicate so we can eradicate stereotypes when it comes to other employees, because we tend to focus mostly on the employer. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for those questions. Those online, we will come to you soon. On the first question around the issue of persons from the unseen disability, I mean, how can we accelerate the recruitment for them? Maybe I should allocate that to you, Paul. And also the question particularly that's around the costs, the issue of assistive technology and the cost, I will allocate that to Srilakshmi. And then the question around what can CSO do, I will allocate that to Julius. So let me start with Paul, Srilakshmi, and then Julius, and then I'll add to it if there are any point missing. Hope that's fine. Thank you.
Very well. Thanks, Rasak, and thanks, Harriet, for the question. The first part of what can we do for unseen disabilities? For me, I always say the first thing, which a lot of times we underestimate, is the point of education. While we think we have advanced on the subject, we are still quite, for want of better expression, ignorant about it. All right. And Rasak helped us. I think about 3 years ago, we brought in an intern into our organization who is an albino. Could walk, could talk, but there was something missing because on our floor, there was so much light there. She struggled to, or she was struggling to see or to cope during the day when the sun gets into the room. It was something as basic or as little as getting her a small cubicle, which we shaded, where she goes in and she's able to work from. So education, in a sense, having a good understanding of what the disability is, what are the tools in place, and then helping people get them. For those in corporates, most of these assistive technology are already built into things like Microsoft Word, PowerPoint, Microsoft Teams. At the moment, I have an intern with hearing impairment. Whenever we're on a virtual call, I always make sure that the transcription is on. And it's in training the people, line man. Remember I had said we have a training for all these people to say when you are speaking with someone with hearing impairment, you speak slowly because a lot of time they are reading your lips. You need to sometimes apply gestures because they connect all of these things to make meaning. So education for employers, education for the people within the organization that they work with. What we have also done over the period is for the persons with disability within the organization, we also educate them to say, empowering them to get them to believe that your disability is not a limitation. And the fact that you got job opportunity, I didn't do you a favor. It's because you actually deserve it. It's because you actually can do it. So getting them to operate from a place of confidence, and then also now equipping them with modern or state-of-the-art technology. And this sometimes, of course, I recognize some of them come with costs. Sometimes are very, very available to us. Sometimes are very basic things that we do. It's more around how we get to deal with them. Like I said, speaking with someone with hearing impairments, speak slowly because they are reading your lips. Apply gestures because they pay attention and connect all of these things to make sense. So it's training along or across the broad or the wider spectrum of all the agents or the parties along the chain. And I believe once we do that, of course, the other things around the technology with high investment required, all of these things will come to play. Thanks.
Thank you. Let me go to Srilakshmi online to respond to that other questions around costs.
Yeah. I think, thanks, Harriet, for your question. I think Paul already answered a part of it by saying that some of the assistive aids, it could already be built in, as he said, within your softwares. So when it comes to the other thing that does have a cost, I completely agree. Some of it is expensive. The same is the case even in Ethiopia, where many of the assistive aids are imported and it is expensive. How do we navigate around this problem? Does the company bear the cost? Does the individual person with disability, does he bear the cost? Sometimes it's both, right? Because some persons with disabilities would require assistive aids even when they have to study, and so they continue using them. So then the company doesn't have to bear that cost. But sometimes, for example, if you require a screen reader for using a computer for a person who is blind, in many companies, the company bears the cost for that, for the license or for something else, right? So it's really a case-to-case basis, but I completely do agree that some assistive aids are very expensive. One of the things that persons with disabilities in Ethiopia do is to approach organizations of persons with disabilities, OPDs, or NGOs that work in the disability sector, where they could get access to these assistive aids at a very discounted rates, sometimes even free if a certain project allows for it. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you very much. Let me come to Julius, and I will then add a few additional points to it.
Thank you very much. I think for CSOs and organizations of persons with disabilities, the responsibility that we have to the wider society and the private sector companies is to make sure that we live by example. And when I say that, I mean our working environment to be very conducive for persons with disabilities. You don't need to get to an environment that you feel you are being targeted or you're being undermined or you're being isolated. So for persons with disabilities, being and feeling that you are part of the team is very important. For instance, in my workplace, the integration is very seamless. You wouldn't know that I have a disability. So there's no need to magnify the disability. And also I feel that to the wider society, we need to create more sensitization and awareness around the employment of persons with disabilities, and even to ensure that people don't have the fear of working alongside persons with disabilities. I would say, and the most powerful way of, telling positive stories is through storytelling. So if we show that persons with disabilities can actually collaborate with the team in the office or, around the workplace, then people can easily take up and, emulate that. So I feel that for CSOs, it's a matter of living by example and then transferring that positivity and that mindset to shift the perception in the spectrum.
Thank you very much for that example. I think part of the point we really need to look at when we look at the work that the civil society organizations are doing, they are doing tremendous work. The narrative about women today, we can't tell that story without civil society organization. So every civil society organization do things today, and when they are collecting as simple as their data, as simple as who do we ensure we have the right audience in the room, they think about balancing gender. It also starts from there. If all civil society organizations can start thinking, how do we mainstream disability inclusion into our work? From labor rights, safeguarding, education, then we would not have what we call disability-specific intervention. Mainstreaming is the way to go. And before we need much of disability-specific intervention is because there are not enough mainstreaming programs. So it's also something that it would be good that we have enough civil society organizations who are thinking from this lens. Number two is collaboration with organizations of people with disability. While you might be a civil society organization, you might not have the specific expertise. How are you collaborating? How are you forming coalition for your project? And how are you forming consortium for your project? That is also another game changer, even for private sector organizations. When you develop your sustainability policy and you're trying to get people from the community, how are you ensuring that you put a lens not just by men and women, but also from the point of disability, so that you can design something that is inclusive for all. The third point I will talk around assistive technology. It's also important we think about how do we collaborate. I know in the UK, there's what they call access to work, where the government make availability of assistive devices to encourage employers. I know the Nigerian government is about to release something similar, where they are about to launch a similar scheme in which the large corporates can donate more of their assistive technology to then accelerate the small, medium companies to include people with disability. In Zambia, I know there is a law to that effect as well, similar around tax rebates and also removing some, what's it called, import duty for assistive technology. These are some kind of intervention that we can all look at, because even when it comes to procurement, the import duties also has its own role in terms of the financial cost. Having said that, I'm going to go to Sildad if we have questions or comments from the online participants. Over to you.
Yes, so we have one question from Rosalind on the cost of reasonable accommodation and if it should sit with human resources or with functional departments.
Okay, is that more of a question or a comment?
I don't think so. Let me double check. 1 second. Yes. Sorry, colleagues. IT. Yeah, no, this is a question from Rosalind, but I cannot see in the chat. I see comments from ILO. They are mentioning also what about the cost of exclusion and the loss of any talent when not appropriately accommodated for reasons of disability or any other reasons. So they need to look at the big picture, but not only looking at assistive devices, not singling out an assistive device. Yeah, so I think that we can cover this question, and also we encourage people online to join us and make more questions, and don't be shy, please.
Thank you very much. I think in the spirit of time as well, do we have any additional questions inside the room before we kind of start wrapping up? We want to ensure we give people enough opportunity to ask questions or comments. I'll take 1 or 2 from the room. Then I'll take the closing thoughts and remarks from,
Yes, we have a question from UNICEF, actually, from Yeti. So maybe, Yeti, you can come and then we answer all the questions. Thank you. As you prefer, you can make the question or join us. Okay, so here is a mic. The mic is for you. Ready?
Thank you. No, hi Lakshmi. Nice to see you online again after a while, and great to see the Ethiopian Business and Disability Network this active. And
Hi, Yeti.
nice. Just say that, I mean, I think when we talk about disability, I think it's quite important that we are talking about billions, okay? It's more than 1 billion people that we're talking. And guess what? This is 1 billion globally, and then 80% in the developing world, mainly Africa. So I think missing out, what is the number for 80%? I'm not a mathematics person. I studied law in my life, in my career. So missing out this huge opportunity of not reaching 80% of the 1 billion would be a great loss for businesses. And I would like to clearly make it a case that it's a huge number that we will be missing out, both as customers, but also as a potential workforce. So for me, I think the business case that companies like Unilever and Safaricom, now gradually Kenyan Airways, are seeing about is that this is a huge potential that we have failed to bring on board. So I think, especially here in Africa, if we talk about business and leaving out 80% of the 1 billion, I know businesses are good in doing the mathematics. It's not my job, that's going to be a great, I mean, a huge risk to lose out. Secondly, I think it's quite important to think about why do we need to talk about, well, the disability discussion is mostly around CSO spaces like Sightsavers. It's quite rarely that we hear businesses talk about this 80% of the 1 billion, okay? I think it should be a discussion among businesses. I have seen some like Airtel, I have seen like, you know, companies like Microsoft, Google, they've done a great effort. They have a team day and night working on accessibility, inclusion, because they don't want to miss. All our iPhones are coming with accessibility features because they understand the possibility, the business potential of this huge society. So I think it's quite important and it's quite timely for African businesses to really tap into this 80%. And for me, if you ask me, where do you want to go for vacation? I definitely go to somewhere where they promote persons with disabilities or where they promote accessibility. I don't want to give my money for a human rights breach because inaccessibility is a human rights violation. So I think we have to continue creating that value. And we should stop saying that accessibility is for Europe or for, no, it's a universal interest. So as UNICEF, our key priorities in really getting the learning to earning agenda is talking about solutions. I think it doesn't help us to lament about the problems because the youth are here not with problems. They're here with solutions. All we need to do is give them the stage. And sitting with youth with disabilities in the Inclusive Africa conference, where inABLE is organizing, it told me it's time for the youth with disabilities to take over because it's us who didn't give them the stage. They're ready, they have the solutions, they know what to do, but they need to be given the stage. And sometimes they take over, you know, they take over, they don't wait for us to take the stage. So it's quite important to understand that business, it's no more business as usual. So business as usual would mean that we focus only on some groups. But I think now more persons with disabilities, we have needs. People want to buy devices, they have money. African businesses are not really delivering the devices. So we have to import from Europe or elsewhere. How can we really prepare African businesses to cater for the 80% of the 1 billion? So I just want to make a point in terms of doing this mathematics, that there is a huge, huge potential, huge opportunity, and the world is changing. And I think that's where we talk about the business and the human rights linkage, ensuring that all rights for all everywhere are embraced and held accountable for. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that. That's a powerful sentences from statement from UNICEF there around the need for inclusion and why businesses needs to tap into this huge amount and huge benefit. I'm going to take 1 minute from each of the panelists to give their closing thoughts, and I'll wrap it up. So let me start with Srilakshmi.
Yes, Rasak. Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah, thanks, Yeti. Thank you so much for everything you said. I think we've all been trying to say the same thing, but you put it all together really well. And yes, the business community, you should not be losing out on this really large population. She said 80% of 1 billion, so 80 million. So that's a really big number. So I hope this session has been very informative. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me come to Julius.
Thank you very much, Rasak. And essentially, we have all understood that, businesses, companies, we are not working in silos. We need to work together to achieve the inclusion that we desire and we aspire for. And I think the next paradigm shift, as Yeti puts it, is putting youth with disabilities at the front line because they understand, they know what really, and in African adages, you hear, you know where it pinches, so they know where the challenges are. And these young Africans, they have the solutions, they have the innovations. So it's a matter of giving them an opportunity and giving them by merit, not handing them out to just please the masses. So I think the next step for companies, organizations, and persons with disabilities is understanding that we have potential and we can do it once we're given an opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me come to Paul from Unilever.
Yep. Thanks, Rasak. Thanks, everyone. Very good conversation so far, and I'm sure we're walking away with a lot more understanding of the concept or the topic or theme of disability and inclusion. For me, is what we just heard about the population of persons with disability, and for businesses, it's such great opportunity for us to tap into. Just imagine 80% of 7 billion, and then we now come to Africa. Using same principle, 80% of the total population of Africa. When we get into extrapolating, when we get into every country in Africa, 80% of your population are persons with disability. For me, this is a pool for talents to recruit, and this is a pool for customers to sell your product and your services to. I think it's very, very imperative on all of us to play towards this line. And more importantly is I charge each one of us to be a social agent or a change agent wherever we find ourselves. I think a lot of times we tend to look up to government, CSOs and businesses, forgetting that the first fiber of society is individuals. So as an individual in your very little space, how are you driving and promoting inclusion? How are you receiving that person with disability close to you, and how are you treating that person? How have you extended or stretched yourself to understand the concept of disability, the different types of disability there are, and how you can play your part to make sure that we create an inclusive world for all? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't know if Julian from ILO wants to say any word or statement before I do the last wrap up.
No, that's fine. Thanks.
Thank you very much. The reality, and if you look at what everybody has said here, first, inclusion has a cost, but exclusion is much, much more costlier and is expensive, and it has its own demerit and effect whenever we talk about development. So when we think about inclusion, yes, there is a cost to it, but the cost of exclusion is far, far worse. The second point I've kind of articulated from the thought here is that companies are interested in disability inclusion. The how is the problem. And we need to support more companies on the how, the unseen disability. How do you do it? But beyond that, we're also seeing good examples from the likes of Unilever, Safaricom, and few other companies who are partnering with other social partners. And that demonstrates the power of collaboration. If you are a company or a business and you want to think around disability inclusion, no one knows it all. Partner, engage with organizations of persons with disability or other social partners. Many countries now have the National Business and Disability Network. It's a great place for you to start. You have it in Ethiopia, Kenya, Zambia, Ghana, Nigeria, and few other countries in Africa. So it's a great opportunity for you to explore the potential of becoming a member of those network, for you to see how other companies are doing it, and for you to start from there. But let's keep in mind, the old adage that people often says, there is ability in what? Do you often hear that statement? There is ability in disability, right? I think we need to stop that and move. And I've often said that people don't pay for people's ability. People pay for productivity. So let's also promote that narrative of there is productivity in disability. Once again, thank you all for joining. Together, we can promote disability rights in our businesses, in our organizations, and in our society. Thank you once again for joining us, and I'm sure you can catch up with us again. Thank you.